A sleepy village, isolated from the rest of the nation, sleep soundly for the last time as the dead arise again. Without reason, without explanation, without pity, they seek to gain the community for themselves by consuming those near them. Join me, viewer, as we go over the Shiki's story, characters, music, animation, and scare factor for the Halloween Spook Special. So remember to like the video and subscribe, or else you might be next on the menu.
Story. The town of Sotoba is a remote village in Japan populated mostly by the elderly and those that have stayed in the village all their life, a cozy place to raise a family until the day the Kirishikis move into the newly made mansion on the hilltop. Suddenly, on that hot summer, a strange illness rips through the town, killing old and young alike. The town is gripped in this new panic of confusion and strife, and looking for an explanation of this tragedy in motion is the town's doctor, Toshio Ozaki, the cold and cool new kid in town, Natsuno Yuki, and his friends, as well as the young monk Sesshin Muroi. But little does everyone know that the strange disease is actually the result of vampire attacks. The story of Shiki revolves around the town of Sotoba as it slowly descends into despair as the city steadily becomes alarmingly depopulated due to a mixture of strange deaths and people moving out of town. It is a multifaceted story as well, as you get multiple perspectives of the townsfolk and the undead as they deal with these strange occurrences. And not only is this perspective viewed from many angles, but many philosophical elements enter the fray as we explore ideas like the right of life, the blurred lines of good and evil, the loss of humanity, and more. It's a show that explores these themes more the deeper into the story you go, so each episode is sure to reveal not just more about the cause and reasons for these incidents, but also the justification that both the living and the dead give for their actions. Shiki is a story where nobody is truly safe from the horrors of the night. You'll have characters that you see throughout the story drop like flies, later on revived into vampires, or Shiki as they like to be called. And it is this element of steady decay of both the population and mentality of the village that draws out a lot of the drama and intense scenes. It also has a bit of a realistic twist added in, as how do you convince the village of this fantastical undead, especially when they can mind control their victims? It is this tense balance that makes Shiki one of the more interesting things to watch, as the horror isn't so much nested in the attacks on the victims as it is the overarching anxiety as the villagers are stalked, replaced, slowly depleted, and grow increasingly desperate and insane. Though perhaps due to the anxiety and different perspectives of the story, sometimes certain details can get lost or happen without proper explanation. That is why I heavily recommend that if you watch this show, please watch the OVA episodes aptly named 20.5 and 21.5 in chronological order, as they were originally the unaired episodes of the series due to their intensity, and thus aren't included in the original 22 episode series. It doesn't patch up everything, but it does help explain a lot more about the progression of the final climax of the show. Characters. There are many characters in this show, as you are dealing with an entire village of people that steadily die or are turned. So many people from the first part of the show, from the teachers, the librarians, the kids, the nurses, the town hall, essentially no one is safe. But out of all these villagers, who occasionally have their side of the story shown, the story revolves around a few characters and their inner circle as we go through the story. The main perspectives that we follow are the clinic's doctor Toshio Ozaki and his nurses, the school kids Natsuno Yuki and his friends Toru Mutao and Akira and Kaori Tanaka, as well as the monk Sesshin Muroi. Toshio, being the town's main doctor, is at the heart of all incidents sweeping through the town, as he witnesses most every death and sickness. He struggles to properly diagnose the cause of the disease that is killing his village, to the point of obsession. This leads him into conflict with his childhood friend, Sesshin, the monk and author, who befriends the young vampire girl Sanako Kirishiki and has a crisis of morality. On the ground, dealing with the town's anxiety are the children Natsuno, Akira, and Kaori, as they deal with the deaths of their friends and trying their best to do something about the Shiki taking over. Everyone struggles in Shiki, from the living to the dead, and that is what makes these characters so enjoyable. You get this overall feeling of community at the start of the show as it takes its time to build up the town before tearing it back down completely. While you're watching, you might even miss the point of no return as everyone transitions over to some monstrous version of themselves. The main characters are all deep and compelling, and every familial loss becomes more heartbreaking, even with the steady increase in death, though there are a few complaints I have for some of the characters. First of all, there is, in my opinion, not enough detailed backstory of some of these characters and why they feel the way they are. One of the first big ones that aren't fully detailed is Session's suicide attempt and the friendship with Toshio. These elements are simultaneously large sources of drama and void of proper analysis. Same goes for the Kurashikis and their backstories. How they met Sunako, why they become a family, their personal struggles that aren't one-liners in dialogue. I complain about these things because I feel like this could have been a much greater show and more cutting drama if we had a clearer idea of these characters' motivations. But outside of these struggles, the characters really sell this horror. Music. There are two openings and endings in Shiki. The first opening is Kuchizuke by Bucktick. It has this great retro sound with this very reverberant rock between the hard drums and tense guitars, but that sound just makes a great backdrop for the synths that cut through the whole dynamic range with this bells and mandolin-like sound. It's able to maintain this balance of haunting the listener with the vocals and pushing us ahead with the instrumental. The second opening is Calendula Requiem by Kanon x Kanon. It's not as much as a banger as Kuchizuke, but it still has a great vibe to it, being a J-pop song filled with strings, piano, Eurobeat percussion, and passionate vocals. It's good, but not something I'd put in my playlist. The first ending is Walk no Yakusoku by Nangi. It's probably the only song to have this perfect blend of haunting melancholy and strange optimism. The difference between its piano solos and organ-backed rock jams and marches makes this a really interesting listen and great capstone place for the anime. The second ending is Gekka Reijin, also by Bucktick. Similar to the first opening, it still follows this retro rock style with very reverberant, rich electric guitars and vocals. Unlike Kuchizuke though, it's more restrained but still very driving. Bucktick is definitely the best part of Shiki's OST. Oh boy, but the background tracks though, I have to applaud it because I feel like making a real full-length album worth of haunting tracks is a dying art, as many background tracks in anime these days are a mixture of these quick 1 to 2 minute mood setters and maybe 2 to 4 actual songs/tracks. But Shiki is big dick energy with a whole hour-long album which contains such a fantastic spread of songs. The background tracks for Shiki is where the real, more immediate horror comes from, between the solemn spread of orchestrated tunes and gothic choirs. All of the tracks have this delicious array of haunting, ghoulish, forsaken, and intensiveness that for sure shits on everything that has aired in 2020. Shiki has a brilliant music section. Animation. Animation might be where this show starts to not only show its age but also dip in the overall quality of the work. The animation studio behind Shiki is Dame, responsible for such works as, well, not much that anyone would take notice of. They are really only active during the late 80s to 2011, and in fact, Shiki was the studio's last major production before they ultimately ceased making anime altogether. As interesting a fact as that is, to give perspective of other shows that aired back in 2010, we have shows like Dorohedoro and Kanon. So looking back at Shiki, what does it do right? Well, there is barely, if any, CGI, from the cars, the animals, and the people. There isn't much in the way of funky movements or still actions either. Even when we get to the visually horrific scenes in the show, we never really see anything overly gory, as the camera will shrink back from the Shiki bite, and honestly, when it comes to disturbing material, the OVA episodes would be your best bet. Nothing is overly scary to look at either, apart from some rotting bodies and disturbingly violent scenery later on. Everything else is pretty adequate, and besides some oddly proportioned character models, there isn't anything that's showing too much age. All in all, it's not really a wonder to think that the studio whose only major successful production was Shiki would go under, but also a bit of a shame. Scare factor. Alright, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't watch a lot of horror, nor does anime have a lot of really great horror-focused shows. You have shows like Dorohedoro, Promised Neverland, Parasite shows that have this horror style, but not really being focused solely on scaring you, the viewer. Really, most Japanese horror likes to fill you up with dread and impending doom rather than just jumping you with a quick fright, which makes it easier for me to watch and enjoy, as shows that are successfully able to fill you with this sense of dread most likely have great stories attached to them, and Shiki is not an exception from that. Shiki is not scary because of what it shows you between rotting corpses and bloody violence, but rather the subconscious battle that it wants you to fight out with yourself. There is no good or evil, there is humanity where there is monstrosity, and there is the crisis of identity of life and death and what is better. Sunako, as the creepy, endearing, and oddly philosophical vampire she is, has many quotable scenes in the show that strike directly at the themes of the show.
I think death is equally terrible for everyone. Young people, old people, the good, the bad, it's always the same. It's rather fair in its treatment. There's no such thing as a particularly terrible death, and that's why it's frightening.
You'll experience these clashes of perspective a lot throughout Shiki. If the Shiki didn't ask to be turned into such, but they are given life, is it not natural for them to want to live? And if they are to live, they must take the lives of humans. So does that make them evil? They must eat to live, and that brings conflict to all, but do they not have the right to live as do humans, animals, plants, and do such? Especially when they feel and still think like they were before death. An existence abandoned by God, left to the wilds of chaos, a blight on the world of which they inhabit. Are they inherently evil beings? Though they must kill to live, though they cause a cycle of violence, they aren't just living as they must? There is no clear answer, and so there is nothing but your feelings to construct the framework of which your experience is Shiki. Will you hunt them down in your mind, support them, or stall in the terror of indecision? This is something only you can decide. Conclusions. Shiki is a show that seeks to play with your mind and your morals while delivering a smorgasbord of great characters and tragic happenings. I didn't go too deep into the spoilers for this show because this is something best experienced blind. Just don't get too attached to anyone. Averaging all of our scores, we come to a final score of 8.4 out of 10. A great watch for those wanting to see The Descent of Man, and don't forget to watch the OVA episodes with it. They are required reading. For alternate recommendations, again, there isn't anything too horror focused that I have seen, but as far as the moral themes of the show, then you might want to check out Neon Genesis Evangelion for an older show that has heavy psychological and moral themes, or something a bit more straightforward in its idea of humanizing demons and monsters, then try Demon Slayer. Thanks for watching this spooky special. I'm Zeosphere and I upload every Friday. So comment below what you thought about Shiki if you saw it, like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more videos like this. Until next time, stay cultured.